Good morning. Today, Sam and I are going to be talking about Excel and things you can do with it in terms of data analysis. So I love Excel. It took me a long time to come around to loving something that's so mathy and linear and binary and cell-oriented, but I think it's a pretty useful tool for organizing data. And I like it a lot better than some of the qualitative software out there. I use Excel to manage qualitative data when I'm not using my kitchen table covered in chart paper. So Excel can be used for qualitative and quantitative analysis. And it uses a system of cells, including rows and columns. So here are some examples. So here we have rows, which are these, and each row has a number. And we have columns, which are these, and each column has a letter. So that means that each cell has a unique name based on its row and column. So this cell here, in column B, row 4, is B4. Oh, and that's like a pun. Let's do another one. I can't think of a funny pun, but so like this column here, or this cell here, that's in column C, row 7, is named C7. I feel like there should be some extra credit points for coming up with Excel puns. If you can do that, let me know. And so once you have your data in rows, you have a language for manipulating your data, as well as a system for storing your data. So the first part that's fairly easy is storing your data. And you can use Excel to store any kind of data you want. So this is, for example, my giant organizer that I use for planning my life. Working from home, starting your own business, it's easy to kind of like lose track of things and watch a lot of Netflix. So I made this tool using Excel. This organizes what I'm hoping to accomplish each week. Yeah, this is maybe a little bit too honest. I have a list of, you can see this one isn't filled in. You can use tabs. So each tab creates another spreadsheet. So you can have many spreadsheets within one, individual spreadsheets within one file. And there's some advanced Excel ways of making, stuff from this spreadsheet, my networking spreadsheet, for example, show up on my overall spreadsheet. That's sort of an advanced Excel task that you probably won't be using for this project, so we're not going to go into it. But there are some formulas you can look up online. So, as you can tell, I hate networking. I have not filled out my networking. Here's a spreadsheet I have of journals I'd like to submit articles to, stuff I want to write about. I could add another new sheet here of like personal goals, like not using the F word in my spreadsheet so much. This is one example of stuff you can use Excel, ways you can use Excel to organize and manage data. You can use it. Here's another example of a spreadsheet actually that I use to organize it at my 2 jobs ago at Boston Medical Center. We had several different projects and papers that were ongoing, and so we used an Excel. You can also, Google Docs has Google Sheets, which is, the Google Docs of Excel. So every member of the team had this spreadsheet, and we would track, what we wanted to write about, who the lead author was, who else was on the team, what journal we were submitting it to, the stage of the process, and our work plan. This was a very ambitious work plan. I don't think we accomplished all these all these papers, but Yeah, but so Excel's function of organizing data can be really helpful if, like me, you struggle with time management or scheduling or anything like that. Excel gives you a pretty good tool to do that with. So before I talk about, I want to show you one feature that might actually be useful for your project. So let's say you're just you haven't gotten to the point where you're doing analyses or you're manipulating cells to get information. Let's just say I was, for example, meeting with the editor of a journal. These are all abbreviations for different peer-reviewed journals we've submitted to in the past. And so let's say I was getting ready to meet with the editor of IDD, a journal that stands for Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. So I wanted to just pull out the papers that we're planning to submit to this journal, IDD. So I would click up here. So there's different tabs up on top of Excel. So I would click on the one that says Data, and then I would click on this A to Z icon that says Sort. So click on the Sort icon, and it tells you have different options. So in this case, the journal names are in column D. So I'd click on column D. And generally, you're going to want to sort on values. Cell colors or the font you're using tend to be less relevant than the actual information in the cell. So pick that one. And I want this to go in A to Z order. Excel is smart enough to know whether you have letters or numbers. So if this were a numerical variable, it would be, you would see ascending order and descending order. So in other words, highest to lowest or lowest to highest. So I click OK. And Excel rearranges my spreadsheet for me. So these, so first we see the papers that we didn't have a journal identified. And then we have the rest of the journals in alphabetical order. And it's important to note that the information attached to them came with it. So it wasn't just that column D got moved, all the columns got moved. So I can now look at, say I was having a meeting with the editor of IDD, I can pull out the 3 studies or the 3 articles that we were hoping to submit to IDD. Pretty cool data sorting. You can also do that by theme or by code or whatever you want to pull up and have immediately accessible. You can do a sort in Excel. So the next thing I want to show you, or I want to talk about, is making cells do stuff. So Excel isn't just a way to store and organize your information, it's a way to manipulate and learn and analyze your information. So you can, like I said, you can store stuff, but you can also do calculations. So let's take a look at that. So the first kind of calculation I can do are, let's just say, I forgot what 10 plus 3 is. So anytime you want Excel to do something, you first type equals, and then I would just do 10 plus 3 and hit enter, and I've learned it's 13. This is a really handy shortcut for those of us like me who forget our basic times tables and other what some might term, but I do not, easy mathematical information. Some other things you can do with it are multiplication. So again, press equals because you're having Excel do something for you. And let's say I don't remember what 2 times 8 is. So I would do 2, and in Excel, the star key, so shift star, that's a multiplication symbol. So again, 2 times 8. Division is represented by this slash mark. So let's say I wanted to know what 10 divided by 2 was. I honestly forget that kind of stuff sometimes. I would do equal 10 slash 2, and it tells me it's 5. Thank you, Excel. Very helpful. Subtraction is a subtraction symbol, so equals 10 minus 4, 6. And that is news to me, by the way. So that's using Excel as like a backup to calculate. Now let's say you wanted to add together some of these variables. So if we wanted to know the sum total age of everyone in our data set, instead of sitting there and manually adding all the different ages, we can use what's called a formula. So yeah, we don't have to enter in all the different ages. We can use a formula. And that formula for addition is equal sign. Always use the equal sign when you're manipulating data in some way. Sum, S-U-M, like in the sum total. And then you put parentheses, the first cell that you want to add. So this is B4, the colon symbol, the last cell you want to add. So that's B11. And Excel does this cute thing where it highlights the boxes that you've selected, or the cells that you've selected, so you can check your work and make sure you're, including all the things you want to add in the formula. You close the parentheses and hit enter, and you get the sum total. And the really nice thing about Excel is, so let's say my participant here, Glargle, isn't 19. I entered that incorrectly. They're actually 29. I could update my information, and this formula that I've put in, sum equals these cells, automatically updates it for me. So let's say I realized I made another mistake, and Blark isn't actually 86. They're 26. I would just hit enter there, and again, my sum total changes. And let's say I wanted to add, I had a new data point. I would have to update the formula, so I enter in my new person and their information. I want to just make sure that my formula has been updated too, so instead of stopping at B11, it now goes to B12. So this is the language that's always used. Equals, name of the function you want to do. And each function has its own abbreviation in Excel, and we'll go over that in a minute. Parentheses, and cell 1, the name of the first cell you're using, using that unique column plus row, colon, next unique cell ID, and end parentheses. So let's say you wanted to do, here we have here's an actual real life example. So let's say you want, you have this survey where people rate their satisfaction with the program, their knowledge of the subject, the accessibility of the program, and how much they like the program overall. So they have 4 areas that they're rating on a scale of 1 to 10. Let's say you wanted to know, you wanted to also include a column that was their total score across these 4 domains. You could use a formula. So instead of just doing addition like adding up the actual scores, you can again use a formula. So the formula in this case would be equals sum, because you're adding, F3, oh, I apologize, F4, and that's again Excel's feature of highlighting the cells you're talking about, F4 to I4. And then hit enter, and this adds up the cells. And let's say you wanted to do this for every person. you could use your cursor to grab a hold of this little corner of the box and pull it down. And that extends the formula to all the cells you've selected. And Excel is smart enough that it's not just adding up. So in this next column, it's not continuing to add this row. It's adding F5 through I5. Excel is really smart. I love Excel. And you can do the same formula. I did addition here, but you can do addition, subtraction, multiplication. As an aside, but that might be useful if you ever do any kind of program management, I use Excel for budgeting all the time. So let me find... So, okay, this is a budget that I made using Excel. And so as you know, in Excel, so let's say when we're saying that someone's going to spend time on a project, they may or may not be full-time. So we use this, so we were hiring a research assistant and we want them to be part-time. So they're going to work 50% of a schedule or 20 hours a week. And I've already programmed in what the salary for a research assistant would be. It looks like it's wildly low. This came from my HR office, not me. So this tells us if we were to have this person work 20 hours a week for the summer. And I've also already programmed in the time that the project's going to last. So this was a 3-month project. And then you can also use Excel to calculate stuff like, so you get your salary, and your benefits are always a certain percentage of your salary. So the formula here is... So at my last job, the benefit amount, your benefits were 30% of your salary. So we can calculate what my benefits would be by multiplying the amount of salary requested based on how much time I'm spending on the project, and the amount that, or the percentage of salary that your fringe benefits equal. And then we used a sum formula, so my salary requested plus benefits requested equals the total amount of my salary that we're putting onto this grant. It also lets you do stuff like if you get paid mileage. So if your mileage is being covered, you can program in the amount of trips you're taking times the amount of miles each trip is times the mileage rate at your company. So in other words, this number that we were charging for mileage is a result of mileage per trip times mileage rate times number of trips. Let's say I miscalculated and we're now, instead of making 2 trips, we're going to make 10 trips. I would just change that information, hit enter, and my budget goes up. So Excel is a really useful tool for budgeting because of its ability to do calculations between cells. This is a sum total of my salary plus the research assistant's salary. And if we were going to add other people to this grant, we would change this formula to reflect that. So super useful, that formula feature. Now I've already done this on my Excel. So the data analysis tool pack is like a set of stuff from Excel that lets you do more complicated analyses, including a t-test. So here's some instructions, and this might vary a little bit depending on whether you have a Mac or a PC and what kind of analysis you're doing. And this is there's a little how-to guide on how to do this. If you look on Canvas under Class 10, there's a guide about how to. Yeah, you could just click on this link and watch the video with the really calming, friendly Australian lady. It's like a meditation on Excel, which is probably the only kind of meditation I will ever get into as a human being, though no disrespect to people who have meditative practices. So, once you've loaded the data pack, okay, so I have installed the data analysis tool pack. So then when I click on data analysis, I get several options. I can do, so here's a whole bunch of different tests I can do. ANOVA, correlation, descriptive statistics, F-test, which as you know is related to ANOVA. You can make charts using a histogram. I'll show you that in a minute because it's kind of cool. Regression analysis. The first thing I want to talk about, though, is t-tests. So you can do a paired sample, right? Because we're comparing people's satisfaction at time 1 to their satisfaction at time 2. So before and after an intervention was done. Or their knowledge at time 1 or at time 2, before and after our intervention. So do t-test paired 2 sample for means. And hit OK. And so variable range 1 means which data points do you want included. So also if you hover your mouse, it'll tell you the cell's name. So we want G4 if we're comparing knowledge at time 1 to knowledge at time 2. We want G4 to G11. That's our first range. And then we want L4 to L11 for time 2. Hypothesized mean difference, you're going to say 0, because what that's telling you is that going back to, you're doing this statistical analysis to disprove the null hypothesis, which is that there's no difference between groups. You're hypothesizing that there is a difference between groups, so the null hypothesis is that there isn't, and put in a 0. And then alpha is another way of saying p-value, so that should be 0.05. And clicking this tab, new worksheet page, means that your information about this t-test will go on a new page. So hit OK. And doing that apparently pulls up all the Excel things I have open. Oh, you can even use Excel for tracking your fertility. Which I'm sure everyone was wondering about back of their head. So, coming back to where we were on the sheet we were working with, it's now inserted for us sheet 1, which is our t-test. And we can make the columns a little bit bigger so we can read it. And so here are our t-test results. The mean knowledge score at time 1, and so we can click on this cell and change it. And we can change this label as well. And that'll help us if we're doing multiple t-tests, knowing what variable we're looking at here. Oh, and as another side about Excel, if you want to, so the default in Excel is to kind of squish all the letters into a column and cut it off at the start of another column. But let's say we don't want it to do that. If you click this little button up here, um, on some versions of Excel, it'll say wrap text. That's the command that makes it fit the text inside the box. So I prefer that. It's easier to read. So then you have your t-test results. You have your mean knowledge score for time 1, your mean knowledge score for time 2. It tells you how many observations there were, or how many participants. In this case, we had 8 people. It tells you the variance, which, as you remember, I'm sure, from 707, is a mathematical score about how different from each other each data point is, what the range of the data is. And then here's your t-statistic, which again is sort of a meaningless number, but you are going to report on it in your write-up. And here's your p-value. I apologize. Go with two-tailed because you're comparing two different numbers. So here's your p-value, 0.03. Which means that the difference in the mean of these two groups and the mean knowledge score at time 1 compared to the mean knowledge score at time 2, there's a difference and it's statistically significant. Or in other words, Mike Pence or any other fictional politician's yard is only 0.3% grass, which means he can't walk to work. And then you can label this sheet as knowledge t-test, again, in case you're doing a whole bunch of different t-tests. So that's how to do a t-test in Excel. You can also, let's say we wanted to do some calculations around the range or generate descriptive statistics. Again, we could do that by going to Data, Data Analysis, clicking on Descriptive Statistics, and let's say we want to look at the overall or the total score for time 1. So we would do J4 to J12, and grouping it by columns means that we're going to get descriptive statistics about the column as opposed to getting descriptive statistics about each individual or each row. Hit OK. One statistical, so we want summary statistics. We want the confidence level for the mean. And so here we have descriptive statistics for, and I'm going to label column 1 before I get as time 1 total scores. So the mean is 17, the standard error, which is, sorry, we're going to ignore standard error. That's a statistical thing you don't need. We get the median, the mode, the standard deviation, the range, the minimum and maximum, the sum total. The count is how many people or how many rows were participants were surveyed. So you can do some really cool things with Excel. It really makes your life like a lot easier for you. I want to talk about is, and you can really play around with the quantitative features of Excel. You can do some really cool things with it. I think the t-test one is something that a few groups will have to do, so I talked about that. But yeah, enjoy it. Oh, and here's some instructions for sorting data, like I showed you in that qualitative example of papers we had in progress where we sorted them by sorry, I'm distracted. Sam's doing something very cute. She's cuddling. But yeah, so where I sorted the papers by what journal we were planning on submitting them to. So I want to talk a little bit about using Excel for qualitative research. So this is the example we talked about in class where this was content analysis. So we built our code book based on what we thought people might say. And then we grouped our codes according to theme. So this study where we interviewed primary care clinicians about how they presented prostate cancer screening options to their patients in light of some new guidelines that had just come out at the time. So we thought decision making might be an important theme, and we came up with some codes that might impact providers' decision making. So we thought, these were some of the codes or little tags we might assign to different quotes or passages by clinicians that related to decision making around the guidelines. Another thing we thought that might be important was risk, or sort of perceptions of risk, and so these were some codes related to perceptions of risk. For each code, we have a definition, so kind of giving us guidelines on what passages would fall under this code, or how to code, when to use this code. Theoretically, this would increase intercoder reliability because we have some clear definitions. So we have all our codes on rows, and then each participant has a column where we can, if we have typed transcripts, we can cut and paste. Again, this is one way of managing your codes. If you have typed transcripts, you can also, just cut the actual transcript into pieces and organize them. Spread some chart paper out on your kitchen table and organize the codes physically on paper. You don't need to do this method of coding data, but this is one way that I use Excel to organize qualitative data sometimes. I want to show you one more example of a code book using Excel. So this was my really good friend Jen. She had to do kind of a cumulative project, or like it was called a culminating experience for her master's degree. And so she interviewed service providers about who worked in the field of substance use disorder and women, pregnant people. So sort of how substance use disorder treatment is complicated, or accessing it is complicated for pregnant people. And so she ultimately interviewed 8 key informants who consented to having their names used. These were leading professionals in their field. So much like the group that's doing key informants to look at the impact of structural and state violence against young Black men on their parents and communities. This was a key informant interview design. And you'll notice that none of the interviews are filled in. So we had all these codes that we came up with. This was also content analysis. Although it was sort of a hybrid. It was a blend of content analysis and also grounded coded theory, in that we read the transcripts from all 8, what ultimately ended up being 8 key informants, and used what they were saying to come up with these codes. In this iteration, we haven't yet assigned themes to the code. We haven't yet grouped the codes into themes. So in reading the transcripts, these were some issues or codes that we thought we might want to assign. And then we did a sort to, this was a code that Jen later came up with some better wording for. This was my first run through. We use a sort to group them alphabetically. And we did not end up using Excel. We ended up spreading out a whole bunch of chart paper across my dining room table, and designating and cutting up all the transcripts and designating an envelope or an area on each for each of the codes, and then just cutting up the transcripts into pieces and putting them into the appropriate envelopes. For some of them, we ended up, so like this was an example, mom versus baby. This one code ended up becoming, I think, 4 different themes because there were different ways that people viewed mothers and their children as in conflict with each other. And then we found that this, in Jen's professional experience as a public health professional, she felt that that was sort of a false dichotomy. It was really not applicable and kind of sexist. So we ended up having one theme that was the false dichotomy, or sort of making people choose between the pregnant person and their child. We had a theme about ways this kind of mother versus baby phenomenon, or pregnant person versus baby phenomenon versus fetus phenomenon was enforced. We had a theme about how clients were resisting that false dichotomy. And we had a theme about how professionals were resisting it. So this is an example of how one code, because this envelope, when we did that method of coding, this envelope was just overflowing. So this one code ended up being 4 different themes. Other codes got collapsed. So this code here, staff type, ended up being collapsed into a single code about medical care, or care in general. So this one theme of care types ended up including medical care, staff type, and medication-assisted treatment. So this is an example of collapsing codes to create a theme. You can do both. And Excel is really nice and helps you do that using the sort feature and cut and paste. Oh, and this is Jen of the Jen Mazdia literature review system. Jen Mazdia is super brilliant. You should just be on the lookout for her. So that's some information about using Excel for qualitative coding. And in general, Excel's pretty great. I hope you get comfortable with it. There's a tool or a list, a handout posted on Canvas under week 10 called something like Common Excel Formulas, and that has all the stuff like multiplication and division. Another website I really do recommend is statisticshowto.com. And that's the website with the really calming Australian lady who has, just the most calming voice and tells you how to do statistical stuff in Excel. And I'm now going to go walk Sam.